In the bustling city of Lagos, Nigeria, a young boy named Chidi noticed how only his hard-working mother, Amara, had become. Determined to bring happiness back into her life, Chidi took it upon himself to find her a good husband. His efforts led him to Mr. Emeka, a kind and respected man in the community. Chidi introduced Mr. Emeka to his mother, and soon they started spending time together. Just as things were looking promising, Amara's long-lost brother, Obi, returned unexpectedly, creating tension and uncertainty about the future of their relationship. The atmosphere in Amara's home was different now. With Obi's return, there was an unspoken tension in the air. While Amara was overjoyed to have her brother back, she couldn't ignore the growing feelings she had for Mr. Emeka. But Obi's protective nature made her hesitate. Chidi, who had been the driving force behind his mom's newfound happiness, sensed the shift. He could tell that his uncle was wary of Mr. Emeka, and it worried him. Chidi didn't want anything to come between his mom and the happiness she deserved. One evening, as they all sat down for dinner, the silence in the room was palpable. Chidi decided to break it with a question that had been on his mind. "Uncle Obi, why don't you like Mr. Emeka?" Obi looked surprised by the directness of the question. He glanced at Amara before answering. "It's not that I don't like him, Chidi. I just want to make sure your mom is with someone who truly cares for her." Amara sighed, placing her hand on Obi's. "I know you're looking out for me, Obi. But Mr. Emeka has been nothing but kind. I think we should give him a chance." Obi looked into his sister's eyes and saw the sincerity in them. He realized that his overprotectiveness might be standing in the way of her happiness. "Maybe you're right, Amara. I've been gone for a long time, and I need to trust your judgment." Chidi felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Does this mean Mr. Emeka can visit us more often?" he asked hopefully. Obi smiled for the first time in days. "Yes, Chidi. I think that would be a good idea." The next weekend, Mr. Emeka was invited over again, but this time, the atmosphere was much warmer. Obi took the opportunity to get to know Mr. Emeka better, and as they talked, he began to see what his sister saw in him. Mr. Emeka was not only kind but also deeply respectful and genuinely interested in Amara's well-being. Over the following weeks, the bond between Amara and Mr. Emeka grew stronger. They went on more outings together, sometimes with Chidi and Obi, sometimes just the two of them. Chidi's heart swelled with happiness every time he saw his mom laughing and enjoying herself. He knew that the love he had hoped for was blossoming before his eyes. One day, as they were all sitting together in the living room, Mr. Emeka turned to Amara with a serious expression. "Amara, these past few months have been the happiest I've known in a long time. I care deeply for you and Chidi, and I want to be there for both of you, always. Would you consider making this relationship something more permanent?" Amara was taken aback by the question, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked over at Chidi, who was beaming with excitement, and then at Obi, who gave her an encouraging nod. Tears welled up in Amara's eyes as she smiled softly. "Yes, Mr. Emeka. I would love that." Chidi jumped up in joy, unable to contain his excitement. "We're going to be a family." As they all embraced, Chidi felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His plan had worked, and now, the family he had always dreamed of was becoming a reality. But as they celebrated, a knock at the door interrupted their moment of joy. They all turned to see who it could be, unaware that this unexpected visitor would bring with them a new challenge that would test the strength of their newly formed bond. The room fell silent as the knock echoed through the house. Amara exchanged a worried glance with Mr. Emeka, while Chidi, still buzzing with excitement, quickly ran to the door. Obi stood up, his protective instincts kicking in. Chidi opened the door to find a woman standing there. She was dressed in a long, flowing traditional dress, with a stern expression on her face. Behind her, two other people stood, a man and another woman, both looking equally serious. "Good evening," the woman said in a formal tone, her eyes scanning the room as if assessing everyone. "I am Mrs. Nkechi, and these are my associates." "We've come to speak with Mr. Emeka." Mr. Emeka's face tightened with recognition. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Nkechi, what brings you here?" The woman's expression remained unchanged as she replied, "I represent the Emeka family's interests. We've heard about your relationship with this woman," she said, gesturing towards Amara. "And we need to discuss some important matters." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what this was about, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Obi moved closer to his sister, his gaze fixed on the strangers and their home. Mr. Emeka sighed, realizing this was a conversation he had hoped to avoid. "This isn't the time or place, Mrs. Nkechi. Let's arrange another meeting to discuss whatever concerns you have." But Mrs. Nkechi was persistent. "Mr. Emeka, your family has certain expectations. This relationship is unconventional, and there are things that need to be addressed." Chidi, sensing the seriousness of the situation, quietly moved closer to his mom. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could tell it wasn't good. Amara, gathering her courage, stepped forward. "If this concerns me, I believe I should be part of the conversation." Mrs. Nkechi's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at Amara. "You're right, Ms. Amara. This does concern you. The Emeka family has a reputation to uphold, and we want to ensure that any union is in line with our traditions and values." Mr. Emeka looked at Amara, his heart heavy. He had known that his family might not fully approve of their relationship, but he hadn't expected them to intervene so soon. Obi, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "With all due respect, Mrs. Nkechi, Amara is a wonderful woman, and she deserves happiness. If Mr. Emeka truly cares for her, then that should be what matters." Mrs. Nkechi turned her sharp gaze towards Obi. "And who are you to speak on this matter? This is a family concern." Obi met her gaze steadily. "I'm her brother, and I'm here to protect my sister's interests." The tension in the room was thick as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Chidi clutched his mother's hand, feeling the weight of the situation. He had worked so hard to bring his mom and Mr. Emeka together, and now it felt like everything was unraveling. Mr. Emeka finally broke the silence. "Mrs. Nkechi, I appreciate your concerns, but I've made my decision. I care deeply for Amara and Chidi, and nothing will change that." Mrs. Nkechi's face hardened. "If you proceed with this relationship, there will be consequences. The family will not support you, and you may find yourself cut off from our resources." Amara's heart sank. She didn't want to be the cause of a rift in Mr. Emeka's family, but she also didn't want to lose the happiness she had found with him. Chidi, feeling the tension rise, suddenly spoke up, his voice filled with emotion. "Please don't take Mr. Emeka away from us. He makes my mom happy, and we want him to be part of our family." Everyone turned to look at the little boy, his eyes wide with fear and determination. Mrs. Nkechi's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "This isn't about what's fair," Mrs. Nkechi said gently, looking down at Chidi. "It's about what's best for everyone involved." Mr. Emeka, seeing the distress on Chidi's face, knelt down beside him. "Chidi, I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together." But as the night wore on, it became clear that the challenges ahead would test the strength of their bond. Amara, Mr. Emeka, and Chidi knew they would need to stand united if they were going to overcome the obstacles that lay before them. The journey wasn't over yet, and the road ahead was uncertain, but their love and determination would guide them through whatever came next. As the night deepened, the tension in Amara's home remained heavy. Mr. Emeka knew he had to make a difficult decision, one that would affect not just him but also the people he had come to care deeply about. He took a deep breath, stood up, and faced Mrs. Nkechi with resolve in his eyes. "Mrs. Nkechi," he began, "I respect my family and our traditions, but I've also learned that true happiness doesn't always align with expectations. I have found love and a sense of belonging with Amara and Chidi, and I won't let that go." Amara felt a surge of emotion as she heard his words. She knew how much his family meant to him, but hearing him choose her and Chidi over everything else made her heart swell with love and gratitude. Mrs. Nkechi, seeing the determination in Mr. Emeka's eyes, realized that there was no changing his mind. She sighed and gave a slight nod. "Very well, Mr. Emeka. If this is truly what you want, then I won't stand in your way. But understand that the family may not support your decision." "I understand," Mr. Emeka replied, his voice steady. "But I believe that over time, they will see that this was the right choice." With that, Mrs. Nkechi turned to leave, her associates following her out the door. The tension in the room lifted slightly as the door closed behind them, leaving Amara, Mr. Emeka, Obi, and Chidi alone once more. Amara walked over to Mr. Emeka and placed her hand on his arm. "Are you sure about this? I don't want to cause trouble for you." Mr. Emeka smiled gently at her. "Amara, you and Chidi are worth any trouble that may come. I want to build a future with you, no matter what it takes." Obi, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke up. "Mr. Emeka, I admire your courage. I was wrong to doubt your intentions. If my sister is happy, then I'm happy, too." Chidi, who had been holding his breath throughout the conversation, finally exhaled and smiled brightly. "Does this mean we're really going to be a family?" Mr. Emeka knelt down and hugged Chidi. "Yes, Chidi, we're going to be a family. And nothing will change that." As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Amara, Mr. Emeka, and Chidi grew stronger. They faced challenges together, but each time, they emerged closer and more united. Even Obi, who had been skeptical at first, became one of Mr. Emeka's biggest supporters. Eventually, word spread through the community about their love story, and to everyone's surprise, even Mr. Emeka's family began to soften. They saw how happy he was and how much Amara and Chidi meant to him. Slowly, they began to accept the new family, recognizing that love and happiness were more important than rigid traditions. One sunny afternoon, Mr. Emeka proposed to Amara in the very park where Chidi had first introduced them. It was a simple, heartfelt proposal, and Amara, with tears of joy in her eyes, said yes. Chidi cheered as he hugged them both, overjoyed that his dream had come true. The wedding was a beautiful celebration of love, attended by friends, family, and even some of Mr. Emeka's relatives who had come around. As they exchanged vows, Chidi stood beside them, proud to have played a part in bringing them together. In the end, the love that had started with a little boy's wish had blossomed into a lifelong bond. Amara, Mr. Emeka, and Chidi formed a happy, loving family, overcoming every challenge that came their way. They proved that with love, determination, and the support of those who matter most, anything is possible. And as they lived their lives together, they knew that they had found something truly special, a love that would last forever.